got it. And I'm Shannon, by the way, and this is Myra, and we're both current members of the New York City Dyke March. And maybe we should say it again for the recording, is that this is the 30th anniversary panel to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the New York City Dyke March by talking to people who were there for the very first one. So we're going to go around, say name, pronouns, and then the icebreaker will just be the role, your role in the first Dyke March. So I'm Shannon Kelly, she, her, and I did not have a role in the first Dyke March. So yeah, pass the baton to whoever wants to speak first.
Go, Marlene.
Oh, you heard me?
No, I didn't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
No, I'm having a hard time hearing everybody, and I'm on my phone, and I've got the volume turned really high, but can't really hear that well. Let's see, first Dyke March, the first New York City Dyke March. We came back from DC and we said, okay, so what are we going to do here? And we sat around and talked. We met at the center. We met at I can't remember her name, Christina's house across the street from the center, and came up with ideas to create all kinds of stuff. One of the things I think they said, let's create, was a giant bed. And we decided where we were gonna move the bed to and where we were gonna march from and to. And we decided we'd go down 6th Avenue and wind up at Union Square Park, where Heritage of Pride was holding a rally. That was the first Dyke March, I believe, in New York City. It was 30 years ago. My memory fades me from yesterday. So if I'm incorrect, please correct me. There were a lot of us who participated in that. Me, Max, Christina McKnight, forget her last name, Jennifer Munson. There were just a lot of people. And I think the Lesbian Avengers Pride 2 doesn't do justice to the first Dyke March, unfortunately. And I'm sure somebody was shooting video of it, and I'm sure it's somewhere, and maybe one day we can find it, because it was a wondrous sight to see 30 years ago. And
well, I think the most amazing part of it. Go ahead, Marlene.
No, I'm sorry. It's only gotten better.
I think that some of the things that people should know is that, of course, the police had no idea we were doing this, and they were nowhere to be seen. The only time that we saw them was they met us down at Macy's, because they thought that we were going to charge at Macy's, and that we were going to go inside and disrupt everything. When they finally figured out that we were marching, they met us down there to make sure that we didn't go into Macy's. And they tried to marshal us, and we told them, leave us alone. We know what we're doing. We know where we're going. We don't need you. And they let us go. At the end, this cop said, wow, you should try out for the police department, because we have a test today and you're all so good at doing this. Like, ha, ha, ha. But the other thing is that we had a theme. We always had a theme. And the theme for the first one was I lust for, and then we gave out big pieces of foam core, and people could write that, like it said, I lust for, and they could write whatever it was that they lusted for. And then we realized that we had no banner. So women who came took, they were just participants, which we've always had participants doing stuff. They took the foam core and they wrote first annual New York City Dyke March. And they carried that at the front. And if you see some of the photos of it, I think I actually have one on my computer. I should have known that. I would have gotten it out. And they, marched with that at the front instead of a banner. And we have those signs at the Lesbian History Archives. So if you ever wanted to use them in some event, when we were open, you could come in and get them and take them.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I know that we use the same banner every year. So I feel like maybe—
I know, I made it.
Yeah.
I made the part you use every year. I
Yeah,
sewed
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and just for context, we add something every year, right? Well, Myra was the one who was in charge of it last year, who was in front. You were a front marshal. But every year we add a different art theme to it.
Yeah,
And all those themes are archived at the Her Story Archives.
So cool.
yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone else about what your role in the first Dyke March was.
Okay, I'm Sarah, she, her. So in the first Dyke March, see, they all kind of blur together in my mind now, like, because I had thought the first one was the one where we had the giant bomb, but maybe that was a different one. I'm sure I'm wrong. Because I remember making that huge paper mache bomb. So I was a marshal at the first Dyke March. And it's very much as Max described, the cops were kind of trying to, they didn't really know what we were up to. But we had a couple of people who were very, very well trained, who'd been very active in ACT UP and were very well trained in doing marshalling. So they trained us. And then I think it was the first one, where did we end?
At the Union Square Park.
Right, at Union Square, because the second one we ended at Washington Square.
Right.
But it was just, it was just kind of amazing to see. I don't remember even how many women were there. I mean, I have to say as well, this is when we had just come off the International Dyke March that we did in Washington, D.C., which was incredible. And so then to kind of bring it to New York and sort of do it on our home turf was really amazing, really amazing. So yeah, I do remember, I mean, I have much clearer memories of the second one for some reason. Although I do remember that bed. I absolutely remember that bed. Oh, and I don't know if it was that year that there had been a lawsuit in New York State. I think it was that year. There'd been a lawsuit in New York State that said this woman had sued the state, maybe, or maybe the MTA, because she said men can walk around topless and women can't, and that's just not fair. And so I don't know if the suit had been decided yet or it was still in the courts, but we just all decided to take our shirts off, or many, I wouldn't say all, many decided to take their shirts off. And so that was also kind of incredible, just like all of these bare-chested women just walking down the street, was sort of amazing as well. The whole thing was just sort of dreamlike. I think that maybe that's why I can't remember it, because it was just so intense. But yeah, it was kind of incredible. And just, I mean, we did publicity, but a lot of it was just word of mouth. And people just kind of knew to show up. Yeah, I don't know, Marie, do you want to say something about this?
Put on your microphone.
Right.
Oh, you're muted.
Am I on? My internet connection is terrible. It's really bad. So my memory of it is very fuzzy as well. I do remember, I think I was marshalling, and I do remember the bed was, like, if we could keep the bed intact the whole way down, it was a big deal. It was like really dodgy. And it was a huge deal to have that march. It really was. I mean, the hostility in the city at that time was quite intense. And the fact that it was happening was amazing. And the fact that the cops didn't catch on to it, So I just remember a sense of anxiety about what was going to happen, and then realizing that this was just a big party and it was fantastic, and there was really fantastic energy around it. And yeah, it was such a good day, really good day. But that's, I mean, my recollection of it is really dim.
Is Anne still on?
No.
It doesn't seem like it.
Well, I would just say that the bare breasts were not that year. It was the year that Giuliani basically said that he would arrest anyone who went bare breasted. And so what we ended up doing was and all these people came from the Lawyers Guild to try to negotiate for us. And we told them we don't negotiate. And instead, Alexis Danzig handed out a flyer that said, because of the woman who won that court case, she handed out a flyer that said, know your rights. You are allowed to go top free in New York, blah, 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 blah. And just remember to back up your sisters if anything happened. And then we had this whispering campaign, like 23rd Street, 23rd Street. And if you know anything about New York, you know that on 23rd Street, you can see clear up to 42nd Street, because 42nd Street is the highest point in Midtown. And we all agreed that when we got to that point, we would take off our shirts and we would just swing them around the front marshals decided to do that. And we just swung them around our heads. And then you saw this incredible wave go down the march with everybody swinging their T-shirts. And basically our attitude was, go ahead and arrest 5,000 people. You know what I mean? And they couldn't do anything, and they didn't do anything. And, that was pretty amazing. But that was the Giuliani year of, challenging us. And what about you? No, she's still not there. It's Marie. I will say it wasn't a huge march, because we had already been in Washington and done this 20,000 woman march, okay? And then we ended up doing all kinds of actions that spring, including right before the march, going down to Tampa, Florida to help this woman who had been threatened that her, her home, which was in a trailer park, was going to be burned, and they did burn it. And if she went to the march, she got this threat saying, if you march, your home will parch, and it did. And so we went down there to basically support her, because the mayor of Miami was not willing to label it a hate crime. So we did all of these actions. It was the same month, it was June, in Tampa, Florida. That's right, it was the mayor of Tampa. And when we left, she had finally, called it as a hate crime. But we basically did all kinds of actions to get her to do stuff. And then we came back. So we were exhausted pretty much. So
Yeah.
we,
I mean, I think to connect to that, the Dyke March wasn't a separate thing from the Avengers for a while, that it really grew out of that activism. And so it was sort of we thought of it as kind of one more action. I mean, bigger and more public, but it was sort of one more action that we were going to do. That it was sort of part of just an array of different things we were doing. So it was a little while until the Dyke March sort of became its own separate thing. I think as it got bigger and more, there was more logistics involved. But I have to say, I mean, for me, kind of our rule was, if you identify as a dyke, you can be in the march. That's basically it. And for me, what was so powerful was, I mean, I, marched in Pride and blah, 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 blah. But to feel like this was, we were a march, not a parade. That was, we didn't get a permit, which then was risky. And I think as well, just to be with this group of dykes to say, this is our thing. We don't need help from anyone. We don't need anyone else to participate. We can keep ourselves safe. And that to me was, I'd never had that experience before. Like I'd been in, Lesbian Avengers meeting, like a room for dykes, but not like on the street with a bunch of women, just like saying, just taking up our own space. I think that was just really, it was, I'd never had that experience before, never.
I think that's like a really, really good point, Sarah. And it's something that Myra and I both talked about when we were preparing our questions, was like trying to find a way to link the first one to the one happening this summer. And I think the thing that you just said about the idea that like, if you identify as a dyke, like show up, is a way that we still honor that. We still go topless, like people of every expression go topless. And also we still have like these kind of, I'm really curious to learn more about like the quote unquote bombs and beds, because I don't know that we have as much of that anymore. And Myra and I do have questions planned about like performance art and that aspect. But just to say that like, I feel like the Dyke March is very intent on like honoring the tradition while also expanding it. And like, hopefully every year, like kind of checking out what the scene is, who the people are, and just kind of trying to hope to like widen and evolve. And like, I think that link is like so hard to find and so necessary, like that it's still very hard to like claim space, and it's still very hard to like, to feel connected to other people in this way, based on this word or based on this identity. Or and I'm also really curious to learn more about like what was mentioned before about like the queer scene surrounding it, about the being trained by people from ACT UP, and also the hostility, if you're open to talking about that, like just because I feel like we have been talking about like kind of recent times and just trying to navigate like how the context changes but doesn't change at the same time. But I also want to give Myra a chance if you want to hop in with any of our questions.
Yeah, sure. After this set of questions.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we'll start. And I mean, we've been very curious to learn more about I'll just start with like maybe like kind of like what I'm most interested in is how you guys trained as marshals. You said that you learned from people in ACT UP, right?
Well, I was in ACT UP.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was one of the people who did trainings because I was in ACT UP. And Anne and Marie had been in the Irish Lesbian and Gay Organization, and they were some of the founders of it, and they actually had done a lot of actions on Fifth Avenue. Okay, so a lot of us had been doing activist politics before, direct action stuff, and so a lot of us had been arrested and knew how to train people. So that's what we did. We just, anybody that had that experience.
And I think too, there was sort of this overlap between various groups. So it wasn't like there were people from ACT UP and then there were people from from the Avengers. It's like, there were dykes who had been active in ACT UP who then said, we want to do something that's about direct action for lesbians, and founded the Avengers. So I think, and I was in, so I moved back to New York actually in 1989, and did a little bit, went to ACT UP meetings, but wasn't really that involved. But then Queer Nation started up, and I got very, very involved in that. But it did, I just sort of got a little tired of gay men sort of not really listening. Not really listening. But Queer Nation was in part founded because there was a huge rash of queer bashings, particularly, I mean, everywhere in the village, but also there had been the murder of a young man, Julio Rivera, in Queens. And so we were really organizing around that because basically I guess the Queen's DA was saying, oh, it was just a drug deal gone bad, but it was clearly, a gay bashing that had murdered this young man. But I think too, I mean, I don't know, probably Marie and Max and Marlene can speak to this maybe better than I can, but sort of the community of people who were, so like in the late 80s and early 90s, willing to be out, willing to be political, willing to possibly get arrested, that was not a huge group. And so, I mean, there were then people sort of on the, it was kind of like this. So there were the people who were like the super militant people, and then the pretty militant people, and then, out and out and out. And I think that, it didn't always feel safe. I remember, I think it was with Queer Nation, we did some organizing with Dykes in Brooklyn, and we had an action in Grand Army Plaza. I don't remember. It was, again, another sort of, it was about violence. I don't remember exactly what. And basically, we went home in pairs or threes. We said, don't walk home alone, because it might not be safe. So is this sense that, there was real violence. I mean, it was sort of like on the, kind of the heels of this AIDS phobia, and then homophobia was really on the rise as well. And it was, and I think we also, we had a lot of leftover anger from other things, but I don't know, other people can probably speak to that better than I can.
Well, I think the right wing were very active at the time, and they were organizing quite a bit as well. I mean, that's how the first Lesbian Avenger action happened. They were organizing on the school boards. And so it was a lot like, in some ways, there are parallels with what's going on now, with, trying to censor and ban any kind of conversation about lesbian and gay life. And there was a lot of violence as well. But at the same time, there was a huge amount of organizing, and there was a great sense of community. So you could go, like, there were bars, and there was the center, and people were always meeting in the center. So you could walk in there and meet people you knew who were going to be doing something. And there was just there was a great sort of cultural life as well. I mean, it was very vibrant.
Yeah, well, one of the things that ACT UP started by creating a sense of community where there hadn't really been for a really long time, was that what grew out of it was Out Magazine and Gay City News, and just a range of cultural things. Plus, besides, we all did direct action. And I will just say, if you're not afraid when you do that, then you should really check yourself out, because you're never safe doing that, and you can never trust what's going to happen. And so, we all knew that what we were doing was, not approved. And to this day, we are the only march that does not get a permit in New York City. Okay. And we just refused to do it. They used to come to the meetings. Do you remember this, Marlene? They would come to the meetings when we, at a certain point, Marlene and I, because the Avengers weren't happening, we decided to start the Dyke March committee. Okay. And that's what you're really, the progeny of, if you want to say it that way, a separate committee that wasn't connected to the Avengers, which weren't existing at that point. And so these cops would come to the meetings, and they would say, oh, we're here to show you how to fill out a permit. And we would say, we're not going to fill out a permit. And they would say, well, it's really easy to fill out a permit. And we would say, we're not going to fill out a permit. Okay. And then they would try calling us before every march. They would call our hotline, and they would say, give us a call back. And we would never call them back. Okay, so pretty soon they got the idea that they should stop doing it because they were never going to get us to fill out a permit and we were never going to call them back. Our feeling was that they knew what we were going to do because we did it every year. So what was the point? There was absolutely no point except for them to attempt to, get control and sort of feel like they could come up and know us, or something like that. But everybody at that point, at the point that the Avengers started, okay, there had been, first of all, the history of lesbians is a history of activism. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard of like the Clamshell Alliance. There were all these people that were anti-war, anti-nuclear, women who climbed over the fences at munitions places like women at Greenham Commons, and it was international. People in other countries were doing the same thing. So there was a whole history behind it. So one of the things even in ACT UP was the most political people were dykes, because we were the ones that had already been doing politics. Most of the men came because they were, moved by the AIDS crisis, but we had been doing stuff long before that. I mean, I worked for 15 years on reproductive rights, and I worked on the left and civil rights, and you know what I mean? And in Ireland, people worked, like Anne was working, doing stuff in Ireland, like about the hunger strikers and things like that. So we didn't come like neophytes. But also, I will say, as Sarah said, I think was really true, like we always were doing other things, like the Dyke March was one part of the year. And then we did all other kinds of actions. So, that was very significant, I think, in setting the tone, for what we did. And we wanted it to be both. We always wanted in the Avengers for things to be important that we focused on. Like we said, we're not going to go and try to get into a male bar. Who cares? The whole point was don't focus on them. Make dykes the center of things and go from there. So, we had men that supported us in actions that we did as the Avengers, but they never ran them. They came, if they wanted to participate, to some of them. But everything was organized by the dykes. And that was the center of the point. And there was a woman, a lawyer, who wrote, what was her name? She wrote this book called Lesbian Outlaw. A play on the words.
Ruth Ann Robson.
And if you never read it, you should read it, because her whole point was that if you don't put lesbians in the middle of the law, you're not getting it right. You know what I mean? That you don't base the law on just anybody. And that right now, or most times even now, the laws get created out of the image of white men, white straight men, I should say. And so they never include anybody else in the way they understand a problem or the way they think about a solution. And I think that while we didn't have, we didn't all read this book, we all had that kind of an attitude.
Yeah, I mean, that's still very clearly relevant today, like
absolutely,
in a kind of excruciating sense. I just, out of curiosity, just out of my own personal curiosity, I was wondering, for the sake of just everyone here, if we could kind of contextualize a little bit what Queer Nation is, because I'm actually not familiar.
Yeah, so Queer Nation was a direct action group that started in the early 90s. It was mostly guys who had been, and a few women who had been in ACT UP, not only, but mostly. And sort of founded, first of all, in response to the gay bashing that was going on. And also, I think that they wanted a place to talk about queer politics, not just AIDS politics, although there was, of course, a huge amount of overlap. I mean, it was always, it's interesting. It was for a long, I'm not gonna say always, for a long time, it definitely had this kind of in-groupy kind of feeling that I wasn't crazy about. But it borrowed some really great techniques from ACT UP. So, you don't say, I think somebody should X. You're like, no, I will do it. And, if you're going to propose something, that means you should organize it. And initially it sort of was founded around the idea of being kind of a clearinghouse, so that people would decide an action that they wanted to do. They would come to the floor and they would basically get resources to do it. But then it became more of a sort of self-defined group. And I'm trying to think when it started, like maybe 91?
I think
Something
it started
like that?
in 90,
90?
1990.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because I was only kind of newly in New York. And it lasted for maybe 2 years and then it kind of fell apart. Um, but yeah, it was really, so, the kinds of actions we did. We did this thing called the Queer Shopping Network. Where we would go to malls and like shopping centers and department stores and hand out flyers saying, we're here, we're queer, we're not going shopping. And like a queer person just handed you a flyer. So Queer Nation was the organization that started the We're Here, We're Queer, We're Fabulous. That was our like mantra.
I was there the night we made that banner.
Yep.
I was there the night we made that banner. My friend Michael Pearl is the one who added "We're fabulous."
Yep.
Okay, and it was done. It was done for an action at Central Park, and that's why, which most people don't know, and that's why it says "We're here, we're queer," because the city had said that we couldn't do the gay pride rally at Central Park. So we did an action at Central Park and we made a banner that said, "We're here, we're queer." And then Michael, who was an artist, by the way, he just died this year or last year. He was an artist and he saw it said, "We're here, we're queer." And he just seriously took the paint and wrote, "We're fabulous." And then that's my phone.
Incredible.
And I'll take it off the hook. Yeah. I'm not going to answer it. Whoever it is will just have to wait. But anyway, yeah, so that's.
I mean, I think there was.
I just want to say one thing about that. Want to say one thing about that chant. Some years later, maybe 10 years later, no, 5 years later, I was in Madison, Wisconsin for my daughter's graduation, and it was time for their gay stuff. And so we went to that march. And by the way, Urvashi was on that march with me. And
yeah,
who just died, Urvashi Bai. And all the people there were chanting that. It was 1990. And they were like, it had already gotten to Madison, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I was there and they were chanting, and I went like, oh my God, like, how did they get that chant? And they were doing it. So
Wow.
it always sticks in my head.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship
I
between?
interrupted you.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the New York City Dyke March and other Dyke Marches across the country?
Well, I'll talk to that. The New York City, because of the march that we did in Washington, there were a lot of women from all across the country. There were a lot of lesbian Avenger groups at the time. I think there were about 30. And we used to have conference calls, and we met up in DC. And then when people went back to their cities, we had further conference calls, and we talked about, well, why not have Dyke marches in other places? And right now there's still Dyke marches in some of those other places. And it's just incredible. Every time when June comes around, well, actually, I have a Google thing set up that anything that says Dyke March, I get a note about. And it's amazing to me how many Dyke Marches there are that we don't really think about anymore. But that's how the Dyke Marches came to be. There's still a Dyke March in Toronto. There's still one in West Hollywood. There's still one in LA. There's still one in Boston. There's still one in Chicago.
South
and on.
Africa.
Yeah. Although some of them are a little iffy, especially the one in Chicago, but they still exist, and people, much like you guys are doing now, carry the torch forward. I'm really happy that Max and I were able to stick it out as long as we did, and just talk to dykes who got younger and younger as we got older and older, and say this is something that needs to keep going, and it's really important. I can't tell you how gratifying it is. Max and I are usually in the rear now at the Dyke Marches, but there isn't a year, and I think I've only missed 2 Dyke Marches. This will be my 28th Dyke March out of 30. That someone comes up to me and says, I remember seeing you at my first Dyke March, which was 20 years ago, or I was at the first Dyke March. You probably don't remember me, and usually I don't. But it's very gratifying to see that there are dykes who come out. Sometimes it's the first time they've ever come to something that's lesbian specific, and they are so happy. They are so happy. I know a woman that I worked with on the lesbian switchboard before the Avengers came into being, and the switchboard had a tiny office at the center on the first floor. And when I would leave that on Friday nights, I would walk out into a men of color meeting. Maybe it was brother to brother. I'm not sure what it was, but it was like really cool to see that in this big building that used to be a high school is now a community center. And now there are lesbians walking around, and there's all kinds of queer folk walking around. I met an Orthodox Jew who wanted to come out. I mean, I met him in the center, and it was just like, what are you doing here? And he said, I think I'm gay, but I can't say that to my family. And he eventually did come out, and he's someone who's pretty well known now. And it's just incredible to me. And the Dyke Marches that you see around the country and also around the world are because Dyke said, okay, we're not going to let this go. We're not going to let this die. This is really important. We need to carry it forward. And I hope, tonight will spur people to continue to carry it forward, to show up at a Dyke March meeting when they start meeting next year, that you'll come to a meeting and say, oh, okay, yeah, this is something I want to do. This is something that's really important.
Yeah, and I would say that I appreciate that totally too. Marlene and I, both of us, we said, oh God, when are we going to be able to give this up? So, I mean, it sounds funny, but every year we would sort of hope that there would be a group of younger women who would be willing to take the responsibilities to do it, because it's not, when as all of you who are working on it now know, it's not just the fun part of it. It's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility that you're taking. And after you've done the first, how many dykes are depending on you, because those dykes come to that march. They don't even look at your publicity, most of them. It's by word of mouth, or they've been there before, and they are expecting to be there, and that's a big burden on you, as well as a positive thing. And at the end, when you stand at Washington Square Arch and people come up to you every year of every age, and they say, thank you for doing the Dyke March. Okay, they mean it, because how many spaces are there where you can actually be in a community, not in a bar where you don't know anybody, or maybe a few people, because there are communities in bars But it's not the same thing. This goes beyond one bar, and it goes beyond the community center, which has never been a place for lesbians, even though you're invited there. We used to have fights with them all the time. They would never have a room for the Dyke March committee, you know. We'd argue about that. But it's so important because it is a big responsibility. And when we got to the point in it was our 20th year, right, Marlene, when we did that?
About that.
When we had that, and we had that panel. And on the panel were a group of dykes who were willing to keep going. And we said, we can relax. We can relax because we know there are going to be people who come after us, which is the whole point. When people say, why do you do this? You do this because you want people to be there when you aren't any longer, so that you carry the torch. And it's not just the torch of the Dyke March, it's the torch of activism. It's the torch of not accepting somebody else's definition of who you are and how you should be in the world. And, you know, that may seem like it's not the Dyke, it is the Dyke March. You know, it's part of that history and part of the going forward.
It's also the physical space.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of lesbian activity in the virtual sphere, but like to be in public and have that sense of connection, physical connection with other dykes is just, it's so important. I mean, you can imagine that there's a lot happening from social media and so on, but there's not that much happening physically in public. You know what I mean? So I agree, it's incredibly important.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that Myra and I could say this better ourselves. Like what you guys have said is really moving. And I feel like the Dyke March is just like a living portal. Like you enter it and you come out a different person. And you know, the fact that it's just, it doesn't stop. I'm going to hand it off to Myra now to see if they have any closing remarks, and also to check. I think we're going to move to some audience questions. But,
Sure, yeah.
I want to say thank you so much. Like this was incredible, learning a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, this would be a great opportunity if anybody has any questions in the audience. You can type it in the chat or raise your hand. If not, we have some more questions.
Yeah, we have like so many more. We could do this for like 4 more hours.
So we did have a question about the performance art. So at the very first International Dyke March, there were fire eaters. How did that group come to be a participant in the march?
They weren't in the march. The fire eating came from an anti-violence march that we did, because there was in the early 90s, there was a huge right-wing push across the country to set up laws that would invalidate the lives of lesbians and gay men, okay, of all queer people. And the Avengers actually went and did a lot of organizing in different places, okay, to help with those things. But at that particular time, the Anti-Violence Project did their first march, and they wanted people to take a spot and do something in that spot that would talk, you know, be anti-violent. Well, it was in Oregon, right? Oregon, that a gay man, a disabled gay man and a lesbian who shared a basement apartment were bombed out. That is, people threw Molotov cocktails into their apartment, and Brian Mock died. The disabled gay man died. And so what we did was we set up a shrine to them on the corner of 6th Avenue in Greenwich Village, 6th Avenue and a Father Demon Square. Do you know that place? It's like West 4th, not West 4th, it's Bleecker and 6th Avenue. We built this huge shrine that had pictures of them, and it said burned to death for being who they are. Okay. And then we basically made up leaflets and we in the Avengers, and we also all took turns staying out there every night from the week before until the November 4th, which was, it's a Halloween was in there, and then the election day, because all of these anti-gay propositions were on ballots all over the country. And so we had information about that, and we were there all day, 24 hours a day, for like a week, 5 days, to put out this information. And when we did the march and we came to that corner, we were allowed to, as part of the march, say something. And so who was the person who spoke?
Lysander.
What?
Oh yeah, Lysander.
Lysander.
Yeah.
Puccio. Okay. And she was going to give a talk, and we had it was Jennifer Miller who taught everybody how to swallow, right? To do the fire eating.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this piece where people ate fire, and then Lysander gave a talk, and what we chanted was, we take the fire within us, we take it and make it our own.
Our own.
That's right. You know, that instead of being burned, we're going to go out there with it. Like, we're going to be the people with fire. And we would chant it. And, you know, people always thought this was a stunt, but it wasn't. It was like the most moving thing you could possibly imagine. And Lysander was eloquent. Mm-hmm. You know, she was studying to be an Episcopal priest at that point. And she really was wonderful. So that's what we did. And so as the march came past, we were fire eating. They could look at the shrine. You have no idea. People came to that shrine.
Yeah, I remember, and the shrine was really beautiful.
Yeah.
It was, I remember actually, Max, you and I did a shift there together. I remember that really clearly.
Yes, and people came and brought candles, you know, and they brought candles for people with AIDS who died, as well as the Brian and Hattie Cohn. Her name was Hattie Mae Cohn. And people brought us blankets and food. I mean, it was quite amazing, you know, people that we didn't know, and not necessarily gay people. You know, it was just loads of people saw us sitting there, and they saw the shrine, and they came and read everything. It was incredibly moving. So that's, you know, and there were loads of anti-gay propositions then, and we beat almost all of them, I think. Yeah. Including that one in Oregon. Yeah. So that's where the eating fire came from. And Jennifer Miller actually taught everybody to eat fire. She used to perform with Circus of Muck.
Wow. Yeah, that's.
And she did the Coney Island Sideshow as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really poignant. We did have another slide. You got something? Okay. Yeah, we wanted to move to a question from Gina about the Dyke Action Machine. The question is on the panel talk about the Dyke Action.
Damn.
Oh yeah. I could talk about that a little bit. So Dyke Action Machine started, I think it was sort of like, it started off as kind of like an offshoot of Queer Nation, and initially was kind of action oriented, but then, and we had these great t-shirts that said Dyke Action Machine on the front, and on the back it said strong enough for a man but made for a woman, which was the slogan of some deodorant. I don't remember what it was, but their slogan was strong enough for a man but made for a woman. And so we took that and put it on the t-shirts. But then, and then a couple of artists in the group, Carrie Moyer and Sue Schaffner, started doing these art projects, which were sort of basically using the the look of the form of popular advertising. So the first one was Gap ads, which were very striking. They were like these black and white posters, and you saw them all over New York, of like famous people like Spike Lee or whoever. And so they got a bunch of dykes to pose in the style of these ads, and that was the first one. And Chris, my partner, and I were in that one, and we're kissing because we're so cute because we're like 22. And then, you know, Dyke Action Machine as a group fell apart, but the art project sort of kept going and going and going for a long, long time. And they would do a project basically every year. So
They still do.
I don't know. I don't think they're still doing it,
Yes, they do. Yeah.
but they
I
did
mean,
some
they don't
amazing
do it on a,
ones. Yeah, they did
yeah,
some
they
really
don't do
amazing
it on a
ones.
consistent basis, but they still do things on
Wait.
and off.
Is it related to the shirts that say gay but look like Gap? No, not at all. This is like a new
No.
thing. Okay, no.
That's a different thing.
Okay. Still. Very cool. Sounds very cool.
Yeah, if you go
They
to
made posters, they made
dykeactionmachine.com,
posters and t-shirts, and yeah, they're still there.
Very cool.
Oh, they did movie posters.
That were wonderful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
around Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Straight to Hell was one of them.
Mhm.
And what was the other? Oh, which one? Yeah, there were a bunch of film posters as well that were
Yeah, if you go to dykeactionmachine.com, they have archived all of their projects.
Yeah.
So
one around
from like 1991 onwards.
they did one on gay marriage as well. Is it worth being boring?
Oh yeah, why be boring?
Is it worth,
That was the slogan. Why be boring?
being boring for a blender? That's what it says.
Oh, yeah,
Is it
that's
worth
right.
being boring for a blender? And they still do occasional projects, not on a consistent basis. And often when they're also have been shown in museums, but they were done originally on the street.
A lot of wheat pasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of wheat pasting. We did a lot of wheat pasting.
I kind of wish we did that now, to be honest.
You can.
Yeah, what's stopping us? I'm so tired of.
It's terrific. It's really great to walk down the street and see stuff there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's like the physical presence, you know,
And
rather than
And there are so many vacant buildings in New York now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah,
It's
it's
the best
undeniable when you see it on the street. I'm gonna hand it off to Myra and let them help us close. I know that Myra has one final question that they want to ask.
Sure. So our theme for this year's March is D for T, Dykes for Transliberation. And so we just wanted to close by asking, what are your hopes for this year's March?
my hope is just that it happens and people have a good time, you know, and really, you know, enjoy being around dykes and whoever's there and just have a good time.
My hope is that it'll
I
be
think
peaceful
too. I mean, I've
as
been thinking
always.
about. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I would just want to say, my hope is that it will be peaceful as always, and that all the women who do come will feel safe, and we can make that happen for them by just our
Mhm.
presence, not because we're going to do anything physical with anyone, but just by our presence will make them feel safe.
The people who come who aren't women, well, they're very welcome. Very welcome. As long as you identify as a dyke. I mean, that was always what we said. If you identify as a dyke, whatever that means to you, the march is for you. I just wanted to say, you know, in a moment where, I mean, Max talked about coming out of doing reproductive rights activism. And at this moment where it just feels like, holy fuck, you know,
I know.
that you know, that the stuff that we, you know, really fought for is being rolled back, pushed back, shoved back. Um, I hope that the Dyke March can show that we're not going back. We're not going back.
Yep.
Max, you get the last word. Very
Yeah.
fittingly.
No, it's okay. I just want it to happen. Period. End of story. And for people to get everything out of it they can, you know, and to take it onward. That's my feeling. I don't look at any year as being more important than the next. Just the fact that there'll be a next is what's important. And you know, it'll be what it'll be.
Yeah. I really love what everyone has just said, and I feel like it actually kind of creates the biggest connection among all of us besides the march, is that everybody wants it to be fun, they want it to be safe, and they want people to feel welcome, and that also we all want it to like move on. Like we all want it so badly every year, and I know that I'm not alone. I know that there are a lot of people in this room right now who are on the committee or people who have gone in the past, and I know that everybody here, no matter whether they're help planning it or they're just going to show up day of, just very badly wants it to happen. I know that it's completely, you know, the day of the year that I look forward to the most, more than my birthday. So yeah, just I'm going to say some closing remarks, but Myra, feel free to hop in if you have anything you want to add. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and for coming. Even if it's just on Zoom, it still is really great that you came. And I want to say thank you to everyone who attended. Oh yeah, and then Deb said, because of all of you, this year will happen again. Thank you for allowing us to stand on your shoulders. Well, I'll leave it. I think Deb said it best. Yeah, we'll sign off, but very regretfully, because I could talk about this for, you know, 4 more hours. But hope you guys.
I can say thank you to you. I'm sure we all do.
Absolutely.
Thank you for organizing this. It was really
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah. Well,
And-
maybe we can do it again.
And for continuing the Dyke March.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we can do it next year. I mean, 31 birthday is still important. You got to celebrate.
Every birthday is important.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I think we're going to start.
Take
logging off,
it easy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.